Before I tell you what the avoidant is actually thinking right now, I need you to understand something that most people get completely wrong about this moment. Because getting it wrong is going to cost you months of your healing, possibly more. So stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through is going to reframe everything you think you understand about why they want to come back. Right now, somewhere the avoidant is composing a message to you. Maybe they've already sent it, maybe it's sitting in their drafts. Maybe they're rehearsing it in their head at 2 a.m., imagining how you'll respond, imagining the version of the conversation where you forgive them and everything goes back to how it was. They miss you. That part is real. The missing is genuine. The regret feels enormous to them, and they've convinced themselves that if they could just apologize, really apologize, finally say the things they couldn't say when you were together, that would mean something. That would be enough. Here's what I need you to hear before they reach out. The apology is real. The missing is real. The regret is real. And none of it means what you want it to mean. That's the thing nobody tells you. We're conditioned to believe that apology is the hard part, that if someone can admit they were wrong, the rest is just logistics. But with avoidance, the apology is actually the easy part. It's the part that costs them the least while giving them the most. And understanding exactly why they want to apologize, understanding the specific mechanism underneath the reach out, is the only thing that's going to protect you from what's about to happen to your nervous system when that message arrives. What's actually driving the reach out? Let's talk about guilt first, because guilt is usually the primary engine. The avoidant has been replaying moments from your relationship, specific moments, the ones that make them cringe, the ones where they were cold when you needed warmth, where they withdrew when you needed presence, where they made you feel like your completely normal human needs were somehow too much. These memories accumulate, they stack up, and the guilt they create becomes genuinely unbearable after a certain point. But here's what you need to understand about avoidant guilt. What they're looking for is not to take responsibility. What they're looking for is relief from the feeling of responsibility. Those are completely different things. Taking responsibility means sitting in the discomfort of what you did, understanding the impact on the other person, doing work to make sure you won't repeat the same patterns. Relief from responsibility means apologizing, receiving forgiveness, and having the bad feeling lift. The reach out is about the second thing. Almost always. You can tell because of what they haven't done. If the guilt was pushing them toward actual accountability, they would be in therapy. They would be reading books about attachment. They would be working to understand the specific mechanisms of why they hurt you, so they could dismantle those mechanisms. Ask yourself honestly, do you have any evidence that's happening? Or do you have evidence that they've been suffering with guilt and finally reached a point where the suffering became enough to make them reach out? Because suffering is not the same as growing. Now let's talk about loneliness. Because loneliness is the second engine, and it's sneaky. In the loneliness that comes after a relationship ends, the brain does something almost cruel. It edits. It starts removing the difficult memories and preserving the good ones. The avoidant starts remembering how understood they felt with you, how you knew how to read them, how you gave them space without abandoning them, how you loved them in a specific way that felt safe. And they forget, genuinely forget, or at least stop actively remembering. That your patience had limits they kept exceeding. That your understanding required reciprocity they couldn't provide. That your love was slowly depleting you because it was almost entirely unreciprocated in the emotional register that matters. Loneliness makes them miss the version of you that had infinite capacity for them. But that version of you doesn't exist anymore. And even if it did, recreating that relationship would mean recreating the same depletion. The reach out, driven by loneliness, is not about wanting a real relationship with you. It's about wanting to stop feeling alone in the specific way you used to make them not feel alone. That's fundamentally different. The third engine is the one people talk about least, and it might be the most important one to understand: ego. The avoidant has seen that you're moving on, maybe through social media, maybe through mutual friends, maybe they just sense it somehow. And something about watching you be okay, watching you rebuild, watching you not be destroyed by their absence, is intolerable to part of them. Not because they want you to be suffering, but because their brain is telling them that if you're okay, maybe they weren't that important to you. Maybe what you had wasn't as significant as they believed. Maybe you were just fine without them. And the ego cannot hold that. So the reach out is, in part, an attempt to re-establish importance, to interrupt your moving on, to get confirmation that you still care, that you're still affected, that they still occupy space in your emotional world. And here's the brutal irony. They might get that confirmation and then withdraw again. Because what they needed was not to reconnect with you. What they needed was proof they still mattered to you. Once they have that proof, the urgency fades, and you're left wondering why someone who seemed so sincere, who apologized so genuinely, who was right there, suddenly pulled back again. The fourth engine is contrast. The avoidant is likely navigating new relationships or new encounters with people who are not you, and those people are different. New people don't know their patterns. New people enforce boundaries you didn't enforce. New people don't have the history of patience with them that you developed over months or years. And the contrast is becoming clarifying in a painful way for the avoidant. They're realizing that what you offered, that particular combination of understanding, patience, and investment, is not just something they can find anywhere. They miss what you gave them. But notice what that is. They miss what you gave. The reach out is about wanting access again to what you offered, not about having developed any new capacity to offer something different in return. And then there's the final engine, which is the one that will disarm you if you're not prepared for it. They genuinely miss you. Not just what you gave them. You, your laugh, your perspective, the specific texture of your presence. This one is real, and it's the one that makes the reach out feel significant, because it is. But here is the most important distinction in this entire video, so I need you to really sit with it. Missing someone is not the same as being ready for a relationship with them. The avoidant can miss every single thing about you, can miss you with a depth that genuinely moves them to tears, while still being completely incapable of showing up for you in the ways that relationship requires. Missing is a feeling. Relationship is a practice. You cannot feel your way into being a different person. You can only work your way there. The anatomy of the apology itself. When it comes, the apology is going to sound better than you expected. That's important to prepare for. It's going to have vulnerability in it. It's going to name things they've never named before. And you're going to feel, in the first moments of reading or hearing it, like something has genuinely shifted in them. What you need to listen for is specificity. Not whether the apology is emotional, it will be. Not whether it's sincere, it probably is. But whether it's specific. Real accountability is specific. I know I hurt you is not accountable. I know that every time you tried to have a vulnerable conversation with me, I found a way to end it or redirect it or shut down. And I know that over time that taught you that your emotional reality wasn't welcome with me. And I know how damaging that is. That is accountable. The difference is whether they can actually name what they did, describe the impact it had, and demonstrate that they've thought about it at a level that would require having actually sat with the discomfort of it. Vague apologies are about guilt management. Specific apologies are about accountability. Most avoidant apologies are vague. Watch also for how they frame the relationship's ending. If they say, "We weren't right for each other," or "We both made mistakes," or "The timing wasn't good for either of us," these are red flags. Not because those things are never true, but because these framings distribute responsibility evenly, when the reality in most cases is that the relationship ended because one person couldn't meet basic emotional requirements, while the other person was exhausting themselves, trying to compensate. If they can't take specific ownership of their role in what went wrong, if they need you to share the blame to make them feel okay, they haven't actually processed it. And listen for what happens when they describe change. Because they're likely going to use change language. I've been working on myself. I've had a lot of time to think. I've realized things I couldn't see before. These phrases will feel meaningful. They are not meaningless. But they are also not evidence. Evidence sounds like, I've been in therapy every week for the last 8 months with someone who specializes in attachment. I've been working specifically on my avoidant patterns, and here's what I've learned about why I shut down the way I did. Here's what's different about how I understand myself now. Here's the specific work I'm still doing. That's evidence. I've been working on myself. Without any of that content is just words. If you respond to their reach out, the most powerful question you can ask is the simplest. What does working on yourself look like specifically? And then listen, not to whether the answer is eloquent. Listen to whether it's concrete, whether it names a therapist, a practice, a specific insight, a specific skill they're developing. The inability to answer that question with substance is your answer about whether the change they're claiming is real. Why the reach out will hurt you even when you handle it perfectly. This is the part nobody prepares you for. You might do everything right. You might not respond immediately. You might process your emotions before reacting. You might respond with clear, boundaried words that protect yourself appropriately. You might even successfully decide not to respond at all. and it will still hurt. It will still set you back. It will still reach into your chest and remind you that this person has access to something in you that you can't fully revoke just by deciding to. The reach out hurts you because it interrupts the forward movement you are making. You are building momentum, grieving, processing, starting to imagine your life without them as something other than loss. And then the message arrives and the momentum stops. You're back to analyzing, hoping, replaying, wondering. The psychological weight of their presence reasserts itself, not because you're weak, but because you genuinely cared about this person, and caring doesn't dissolve cleanly on a timeline you get to control. The reach out also creates a specific kind of confusion that's uniquely painful. It makes you question the clarity you'd built. Before they reached out, you had a working understanding of what happened and why. The relationship ended because they couldn't meet your needs. You were moving forward because moving forward was the only rational response. But their apology introduces doubt. Maybe you were too rigid. Maybe this is the change you wanted. Maybe your boundaries are fear rather than wisdom. This confusion is not a sign that you need to reconsider. It's a predictable response to having someone you cared about reappear with vulnerability and regret. The confusion doesn't mean you were wrong before. It means that love and grief are complicated, and they should be complicated, and the fact that it's complicated is not evidence of anything except that you're human. And even if you resist the reach out perfectly, even if you hold your boundaries without wavering, even if you don't respond or you respond with exactly the right words, you have to face the fact that you're still affected, that hearing from them still moves something in you, that you're not as indifferent as you hope to be by now. That revelation is its own grief. You wanted to be over it, you're not over it. And having to acknowledge that is painful in a way that exists completely independent of whatever you decide to do about the reach out itself. What you do when the massage arrives. When it comes, and it may already have come, you may be reading this because it came. The first instruction is to do nothing immediately. Not because nothing is necessarily the final answer, but because the immediate response is almost never the wise response. Your nervous system is activated. Your attachment system is flooded. The part of you that spent months or years hoping this person would finally see you, finally step up, finally show up. That part is surging right now, and it will write a response that serves hope rather than wisdom. Give it days, minimum. Read it once, acknowledge the feeling, put the phone down. While you're not responding, ask yourself 3 questions. First, has enough time passed for real change to have occurred? Real therapeutic work that shifts attachment patterns requires minimum 6 months of consistent effort, usually longer. If they're reaching out weeks after the relationship ended, or even 2 or 3 months after, the math doesn't support meaningful change. Second, what specific evidence of changed capacity have they offered, not claimed, offered? Evidence requires specifics. Specifics you can verify or at least probe with follow-up questions. Third, what do you actually want? Not what would feel good in this moment. Not what the version of you who was still in the relationship would have wanted. What does the version of you who has done the work of grieving and understanding what happened? What does that person want? If you decide to respond, the response should accomplish one thing. It should receive their apology without rewarding it with immediate re-engagement. Something like, I appreciate you reaching out. For me to consider any kind of reconnection, I'd need to see evidence of sustained change over time, which means consistent therapy and demonstrated different patterns across months, not just different words in one conversation. I'm not available for casual contact while we figure this out. If you've genuinely done that work, I'm willing to talk about what that looks like specifically. If not, I need to keep moving forward. It receives their apology without capitulating to it, and it puts the accountability exactly where it belongs, on them to demonstrate, not on you to believe. Watch what happens after you send something like this. Their response to your boundary is more revealing than their apology. If they can receive your boundary without defensiveness, if they can respect the conditions you've named without pressure or withdrawal, that's a better sign than anything in the initial apology. If they get defensive, if they pressure you for faster access, if they withdraw because you didn't immediately give them what they came for, you have everything you need to know. The narrow circumstances where it could be different. I want to be honest with you about this, because I'm not here to tell you that avoidants never change. They do. People change. It's real. But it requires specific conditions that are rare enough that you should not assume they're present, and should require evidence that they are. Genuine change that would make a second attempt worth the risk looks like substantial time has passed, not months, a year or more. They've been in consistent attachment-focused therapy for that entire period, and they can speak about it with the specificity that demonstrates real engagement with the work. They take complete ownership of the relationship ending without asking you to share the blame. They're specific about what they did wrong and why and what's different now. And they understand, without you having to explain it, that their apology is not the finish line, it's the starting line. That earning trust, again, is a process that will take months of demonstrated different behavior, not a single conversation. That you have every right to be cautious, and they're prepared to respect that caution through patience, not pressure. If those circumstances exist, proceed, but slowly. Coffee, not relationship. Conversation, not intimacy. Watch for 6 months whether the patterns that hurt you have genuinely changed, or whether you're seeing the motivated performance of early reconnection that will collapse once they feel secure. Continue your own life. Don't stop moving. Don't reorganize yourself around the possibility of them. If they've actually changed, they'll understand why you're cautious. Changed people welcome accountability. They don't rush past it. The permanent truth. Here is what will always be true regardless of how their apology sounds or how much you want it to mean something different than what it means. Apology without sustained behavioral change is not accountability. It's relief-seeking. It's the path of least resistance for someone who is uncomfortable with guilt and has discovered that apologizing makes the guilt more bearable. The apology can be genuine and still be self-serving. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. The remorse can be real. The love can be real. The missing can be real. And none of it creates capacity that wasn't there before. You are not obligated to accept their apology. You are not obligated to give them another chance. You are not obligated to make yourself available to someone who hurt you just because they feel bad about hurting you. Receiving an apology doesn't require you to do anything with it. You can acknowledge it, let it land, let it mean whatever it means to you, and still choose yourself, still protect your healing, still maintain the forward movement that was interrupted by their message arriving. The avoidant who truly wants to be with you doesn't just apologize. They transform through months of difficult therapeutic work so that the apology is just the beginning of a long demonstration of actually becoming someone capable of being present with you, capable of staying when it's uncomfortable, capable of choosing vulnerability over defense, capable of showing up consistently in all the ordinary moments that actually make up a relationship. That's not someone who drafts an apology at 2 a.m. and finally sends it because the guilt got too heavy to carry. That's someone who has been doing the hard, unglamorous, private work of becoming different. And the apology is just the first thing you hear about a transformation that was already well underway. Wait for that person. Require that person. Don't settle for the apology when what you need is the change. And I want to stay with that for a moment, because I think we move past that sentence too quickly. We hear it, we feel the truth of it, and then we immediately start negotiating with it. We start asking ourselves questions like, but what if this apology is different? Or what if I'm being too rigid? Or what if I let the right person go because I was too scared to try again? These questions feel like healthy self-examination. But in the context of an avoidant reach-out, they're usually just the sound of your attachment system trying to find a justification for doing what it already wants to do, which is respond, reconnect, hope. So let's talk about those questions directly, because you deserve actual answers rather than reassurances that dissolve the moment you're alone with your phone and their message is sitting there. What if I'm being too rigid? This is the question that will haunt you most. The fear of being too guarded, too defended, too closed. The fear that your boundaries are actually walls that are keeping out something good is one of the most destabilizing fears available to a person who has been hurt by someone they loved. Because you know yourself. You know you've been hurt before. You know that sometimes people who've been hurt build defenses that are disproportionate to the actual risk in front of them. And you don't want to be that person. You don't want your past pain to make you incapable of receiving something real when it arrives. That's a legitimate concern. It deserves to be taken seriously. But here's how you tell the difference between healthy discernment and fear-based rigidity. Healthy discernment is based on feeling. If you're maintaining distance from the avoidance reach-out because you've assessed the situation, because you've looked at whether they've done real work, whether they can provide specific evidence of change, whether enough time has passed for transformation to be possible, that's discernment. That's wisdom operating from a clear foundation. If, on the other hand, you're maintaining distance purely because reconnecting feels terrifying, because vulnerability feels dangerous, because the idea of hoping again and being wrong again is more than you can bear, that's worth examining. Not because it means you should immediately open yourself back up, but because fear-based rigidity will keep you safe and lonely in ways that compound over time. The goal is not to be closed. The goal is to be discerning. Those are different orientations toward the same protective impulse, and knowing which one you're operating from matters. In the specific case of an avoidant reaching out with an apology, the question to ask is not, am I being too rigid? The question is, what evidence exists that would justify the risk of opening back up? If the evidence exists, real evidence, specific evidence, time-backed evidence of genuine therapeutic work and sustained different behavior, then opening back up is not naivety, it's courage. If the evidence doesn't exist, then maintaining your boundary isn't rigidity. It's self-respect with a clear reason behind it. What if they really have changed this time? Let's take this question seriously for a moment, because dismissing it entirely does you a disservice. People do change. Avoidant attachment is not a life sentence. With consistent, focused therapeutic work, real work, not casual self-reflection, but sustained engagement with an attachment-informed therapist over a significant period of time, people with avoidant patterns genuinely develop new capacity. They learn to tolerate the discomfort of vulnerability. They learn to stay present when their nervous system is screaming at them to withdraw. They learn to choose connection over defense. It happens. I am not here to tell you it doesn't. But here's the crucial thing about real change. It announces itself through behavior, not through apology. When someone has genuinely transformed their capacity, you don't have to wonder if they've changed. You see it, it shows up in how they initiate contact. Consistently, not in waves of intensity followed by silence. It shows up in how they handle conflict, staying in the conversation instead of shutting down or walking away. It shows up in how they respond when you need something from them, moving toward you instead of retreating. It shows up in the small moments that don't have the heightened emotional charge of an apology. The Tuesday afternoon text, the way they follow through on something they said they'd do, the way they come back after a hard conversation instead of letting it become a reason to create distance. Real change doesn't primarily announce itself through beautiful apologies. Beautiful apologies are available to unchanged people. Avoidants are often extremely intelligent, emotionally perceptive individuals who understand their patterns on an intellectual level, even when they lack the developed capacity to behave differently in relationship. They can articulate what they did wrong. They can express genuine remorse. They can describe in moving and specific language exactly how they failed you. None of that requires having changed. All of that requires only having reflected. And avoidants, left alone with their guilt and their loneliness, reflect a great deal. So when they reach out and the apology is good, genuinely good, specific and vulnerable and moving, don't mistake the quality of the apology for evidence of change. The apology tells you they've thought about it. Behavior over time tells you they've done something about it. The conversation your body is having without your permission, there's something happening in you right now that we haven't talked about yet, and it's important. While your mind is trying to process this rationally, while you're asking questions about evidence and change and whether their apology is specific enough, your body is having a completely separate and significantly louder conversation. Your nervous system remembers this person. It has a whole archive of them, the sound of their name, the particular quality of tension that came with waiting to hear from them, the specific relief that arrived when they were warm, when they were present, when they chose you over their defenses. Your body learned them over months or years of contact, and bodies don't unlearn quickly. When their message arrives, your nervous system responds to the person it learned, not to the person as they currently are, not to the person as they might be after genuine change, but to the person as they were encoded in your nervous system during the relationship. This is why the reachout is so destabilizing, even when you intellectually know better. Your prefrontal cortex might be reading this video and nodding along and building a very clear understanding of why their apology probably doesn't mean what you want it to mean. Meanwhile, your limbic system, the part of your brain that handles attachment and threat and memory and longing, is reading their message and flooding your body with the neurochemistry of hope. Dopamine, oxytocin, the particular aliveness that comes from being contacted by someone your attachment system has bonded to. You cannot think your way out of that response. And trying to shame yourself for having it, telling yourself you should be over this by now, telling yourself you're being pathetic for still being affected, makes everything worse. The response is not weakness. It's not evidence that you haven't healed enough. It's evidence that you're a human being with a nervous system that formed a real attachment to another person. That's not a flaw. That's just biology. What you can do is create time and space between the physiological response and your behavioral response. You feel the flood, you acknowledge it, you don't act from it, you give your nervous system time to return to baseline before you decide anything. This is not suppressing your feelings. This is honoring your feelings without letting them make decisions that your wiser self would regret. What happens to your self-concept when they reach out? Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The avoidance reach out doesn't just affect your emotions about them. It affects your relationship with yourself. Specifically, it tends to surface a very old and very painful question that most people who've been hurt by emotionally unavailable people carry somewhere underneath everything. Was I too much? Was I not enough? Did I drive them away by needing too much? Or was I not compelling enough to make them want to stay? When they reach out and apologize, part of what the apology does is temporarily answer that question in your favor. Suddenly the evidence suggests it wasn't you. They're reaching out, they're apologizing. They miss you, they regret it. Which means maybe you were enough after all. Maybe you weren't too much. Maybe the problem was them, not you. And the relief that comes with that, the relief of having that painful question temporarily answered, is part of what makes the reach out so powerful. It's not just about them. It's about what their apology does to the story you've been telling about yourself. It revises the narrative in a way that feels like healing. For a moment, maybe longer, you feel vindicated. You feel seen. You feel like the relationship's failure has been properly attributed. This is real, and it matters, and it deserves compassion. But it's also important to recognize that you don't actually need their apology to answer that question. Because the answer, the real answer, is that you were not too much and you were enough. And the relationship failed because of their incapacity, not your inadequacy. That answer is available to you without their apology. Their apology confirms it, yes. But it's not the source of it. And building your self-concept on confirmation from the person who hurt you puts your sense of self in a very fragile place. One that will collapse again if they withdraw after the apology, which they often do. The work of healing from an avoidant relationship is partly the work of answering that question, am I enough, am I too much, without reference to them. Of finding the answer in your own clear-eyed assessment of who you are and what you brought to the relationship. Of building a self-concept stable enough that their apology is meaningful but not necessary. That you can receive it and let it land without it being the thing that finally makes you feel okay about yourself. Because when you reach that place, the apology changes character entirely. It's no longer something you need. It's just something that happened. And from that position, you can make a genuinely free choice about what to do with it. The grief underneath, the anger underneath the hope. Most people who receive an avoidant reach out feel hope first. And underneath the hope, if they're honest, is anger. And underneath the anger, underneath everything is grief. Real grief. The grief of having loved someone who couldn't love you back in the ways you needed. The grief of having invested so much patience, so much understanding, so much of yourself into a relationship that kept requiring more than it returned. The grief of having wanted something so badly and watched it fail not because of catastrophic incompatibility, but because one person simply couldn't show up. That grief is real and it deserves space. Not the managed, processed, therapy-speak version of grief where you acknowledge it in careful terms and then put it away. The actual weight of it. The specific losses within it. Not just the loss of the relationship, but the loss of the future you imagined. The loss of the version of them you believed was in there waiting to emerge. The loss of the time you spent waiting for something that didn't come. When the avoidant reaches out, this grief often gets temporarily suspended by hope. The hope provides relief from the grief, which is part of why hope is so seductive, even when it's unwarranted. But if the reach out doesn't lead anywhere real, if they apologize and then nothing actually changes, the grief comes back heavier, because now it includes not just the original losses, but the additional loss of having hoped again and been wrong again, of having opened a wound that was beginning to close. This is why protecting yourself from unwarranted hope is not cynicism. It's not refusing to believe in people. It's not closing your heart permanently. It's recognizing that grief has a process, and that process can be interrupted by hope in ways that ultimately make the grief longer and harder. You are allowed to grieve this relationship cleanly. You are allowed to let it be over so the grief can run its course, and you can come out the other side. The avoidance apology doesn't have to be an interruption of that process. You can receive it, acknowledge what it means and what it doesn't mean, and then choose to keep moving through the grief rather than suspending it for hope that hasn't earned the space it's asking to occupy. A final word about what you deserve. I want to end with this because I think everything else in this video only matters in the context of this. You deserve someone who never makes you wonder if you're loved. Someone whose presence in your life creates clarity rather than confusion, security rather than anxiety, expansion rather than contraction. Someone who doesn't require you to manage their emotions, carry their unhealed wounds, or shrink your needs to fit inside the narrow space their limitations allow. You deserve consistency that isn't contingent on their emotional state. You deserve vulnerability that doesn't require you to create perfectly safe conditions before they'll attempt it. You deserve someone who chooses you, actively, repeatedly, unglamorously, in the ordinary moments that real partnership is actually made of. Not just someone who chooses you in the charged emotional intensity of an apology sent after months of your absence finally made them feel the weight of what they lost. The avoidance apology might be the most honest thing they've said to you. It might represent more vulnerability than they showed during the entire relationship. And it's still not what you deserve. What you deserve is not an apology for how someone treated you. What you deserve is someone who treats you well. Those are not the same thing. And accepting the first as a substitute for the second is the specific heartbreak this kind of relationship keeps offering. So hold the standard, not as punishment for them, not as self-protection from a world that keeps hurting you, but as a genuine expression of what you know you're worth, which is not someone who is sorry they couldn't love you right, but someone who actually does. Don't settle for the apology when what you need is the change. And don't settle for the change when what you deserve is someone who never needed to change in the first place. Someone who showed up for you from the beginning in all the quiet, unremarkable, consistent ways that real love actually looks like when it's working. That person exists. Make room for them.